One of my regulars, Robert Weiner, Democratic strategist, columnist, and former communications director for Clinton Drug Czar General Barry McCaffrey. He's also former chief of staff for the House Committee on Aging and also served as communications director for both Congressman Rangel and Conyers of New York and Michigan, respectively. Bob, good to have you back.
Alan, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm here with Edward Snowden. We're looking forward to talking with you.
And by the way, and welcome back from your wonderful trip in Europe.
Thanks. I still feel like it's midnight. It's 20 after midnight tonight right now because of that. It was a 6-hour time difference when I spoke with you on the last show, so sorry if I was a little cranky.
Not at all. I mean, I don't expect you to ever be articulate, and that was no, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
And by the way, it's great to be with Terry Jeffrey. Terry, I've done some stuff with you guys, and look forward to the show tonight.
He's introducing a guest I've not yet mentioned, but I'm glad he did. Joining us as well, another old friend of the show, Terry Jeffrey, CNSNews.com editor. He's, of course, author of the highly praised book entitled Control Freaks, 7 Ways Liberals Plan to Ruin Your Life. Terry, good to have you back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Good to have you. Yeah, let me start off with you, Bob, because as to media sources inside the Obama administration, there seems to be this patch of group schizophrenia. Now, Bob, if this question were any more up your alley, I think we'd see it attached to your driveway. Now, in the Washington, and then I also want to hear from you as well, Terry, on this. In the Washington Post, you got old friend of the show, Zachary Goldfarb, writing that the White House aides claim Obama, quote, is buoyed by the Senate's passage of an immigration bill, unquote. His communications director, Jennifer Palmieri, says that, quote, you can see it coming together, unquote. But NBC's senior correspondent Chuck Todd recently said to Meet the Press host David Gregory that the White House doesn't see a path to immigration reform in the House of Representatives. I got to tell you, I don't know that we often hear any White House so contradictory on messaging. One group of folks telling their media contacts one thing on a specific issue, and then another group in that same White House telling other contacts the direct antithesis. What's your assessment, Bob Weiner?
Well, Chuck's right and wrong.
Man, why didn't I see that one coming?
The Senate passed the bill with 67 votes. The House is going to have to, or the Republican Party will die. If they do not act on immigration, they will continue to lose 71% of the Hispanic vote versus George Bush's getting 20% more than that. They cannot afford to do that if they ever want the presidency back. So I believe that what will happen, the path is that the House will flunk on its own bills and then have to take the Senate bill as they did with some other legislation earlier this year.
Terry, let me go to you in this one, because Andrea Mitchell, who was at the same panel, she said things are going to be tougher in the House because there's no Marco Rubio to bring folks together. She was referring to the popular Hispanic Republican senator from Florida. Terry, does she have a point, or does the challenge go farther than that? Your take.
Well, I think she's got a little bit of a point, but I think it's really up to John Boehner. First of all, I think it would be a horrendously bad thing for Congress to pass a bill that legalizes people who are illegally in the United States and have been flouting U.S. law for years. I think that would be bad. But if John Boehner brings any kind of immigration bill up for a vote on the House floor and it passes, which I think if he brought one up, you'd get enough Democrats votes, they'd be smart enough to say, even if they didn't like elements of the House bill, to pass it, and they go to a conference committee, it is certain that the conference committee version of the bill, I believe, would at least have an amnesty. In other words, it would legalize illegal aliens and allow them some sort of path to citizenship. If that happens, I think the president wins, and I believe the Republicans lose. And I believe it's not just a political disaster for the Republican Party. I think it's a substantive disaster for the rule of law in the United States.
Terry, let me tell you where I think you're respectfully wrong on that. Where's the conference committee on the budget after the Republicans kept saying that the Democrats would never pass one, and then the Democrats did, and then they won't go to conference with the House? I think the same thing will happen on immigration. This is a new era where things are so divisive that they can't get their acts together.
Yeah, but Bob, you can't expect either chamber to always have to be subjected to the other chamber's version, all in the name of whatever justification is going to be cited as the motive. Because by that measure, all of a sudden, the Congress can no longer work its regular order. You can no longer have one chamber have one version of a bill, the other chamber have its own version. Similar bill, similar subject matter, both chambers having a different take. Oh, why don't we just pass what we're going to pass in each of our chambers and then hammer it out through a House-Senate conference committee? Why is it that either side should be able to indignantly say, how dare you do it through a House Senate Conference Committee. Just vote on the bill we sent over to you from our chamber. Bob Weiner.
I absolutely agree. But how do you explain it then? You have a 60 to 70 vote block in the House that stops anything from happening, and that's why Boehner has been 3 times forced to violate the Hastert rule of a majority of Republicans to allow things to go through. He
First
can't
of all, the
get
Hastert
a majority
rule,
of Republicans,
by
and
the
he
way,
won't be
everybody,
able to get it on this one.
Everybody, the Hastert rule refers to what Dennis Hastert had to say some years ago when he was the Speaker of the House. He said no bill would be passed unless it had the majority of the majority. Majority of the majority. In other words, so even if the majority of the House favored a particular bill, if it didn't enjoy the support of the majority, then it was going to be invalid. But let's face it, the Hastert bill is nothing more than nomenclature for that which has always existed for decades. Isn't that fair to say, Terry Jeffrey? Both parties have always said that anything that passes should be supported by a majority of the majority. Or am I overstating it, Terry Jeffrey?
Well, no, I think that's the case. I think it's remarkable that John Boehner would even consider violating that rule. And you know, quite frankly, the framers of the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, expected the House of Representatives to have primary power over these kinds of things. They didn't expect it to be the Senate. They didn't expect it to be the President. They didn't expect it to be the court. So it's right that the House of Representatives should have a veto over this. And I really do think the kinds of things you're talking about are political machinations. The question is whether or not the Republican leadership decides they want a bill to pass. If they want a bill to pass, it will pass. I think it'd be a huge mistake for them to do that, but I'm not convinced that they will block an immigration bill. So as a conservative who opposes it right now, like a lot of other conservatives, I'm looking at John Boehner and saying, you know what, this guy might actually do what President Obama wants here.
We have assisting me still in the opining, old friends to the show, Bob Weiner, Robert Weiner, if you will, Democratic strategist, columnist, and former communications director for Clinton drug czar General Barry McCaffrey, and Terry Jeffrey, CNSNews.com editor and author of the highly praised book entitled Control Freaks, 7 Ways Liberals Plan to Ruin Your Life. Gentlemen, thank you again for being with us. Let me go to you on this one first, Terry. As the Gang of Eight's immigration reform bill had been advertised, illegal immigrants would be able to have rather quick, immediate legal status through non-immigrant visas, but would not have pathways to citizenship till after the border had been verifiably secured to some definitive extent. Then we learned a few weeks ago from the Washington Post and others that even if the border isn't secured, not as the bill was written then, non-immigrant visa holders would still have been able to apply for citizenship. Now, this revelation, if it had been allowed to stand as far as I saw it, would have killed the bill in the Senate. Why? Because if there's no point of finality attached to a standard, then it ceases to be one, and of course all assurances that were subsequently given become, by extension, equally without a standard. Now, the Senate has of course corrected this, or they've endeavored to correct this, but there's still a problem for the bill as it goes to the House of Representatives. And that is this. Even if the bill is exactly as being advertised and we have a genuine trigger that must be met before pathways to citizenship can be embarked upon, at the same time, the bill still does permit currently illegal immigrants to eventually become non-immigrant visa holders and enjoy legal status even though they have no privileges. That is, for many people in the House, in and of itself, enough of an impediment. My question to you is this. If indeed it could be thoroughly crystallized that, in fact, the Senate bill has this hard trigger and we would get all these goodies that so many of us have been wanting all along, you know, a great deal more Border Patrol boots on the ground. You're going to have 20,000 more, bringing it up to 40,000, supposedly resulting in 1 Border Patrol agent every 1,000 feet, 700 miles of barriers, walls, and fences, aerial drones to monitor the entire border, providing quick retrieval of these folks crossing illegally. You're going to have scanners. And again, no pathways until these things verifiably occur. If we could see that that's a hard promise that will not be something from which folks walk away at a later date, would that be enough to convince a lot of these otherwise reluctant Republicans? Or are they still remembering Simpson-Mazzoli when so many promises were later broken, and because of that, we just can't accept anything until we have absolute border security, even before illegal immigrants are given non-immigrant visa status?
know, I don't think that any of that would persuade the people in the House who are adamantly opposed to this to change their mind, and I don't think it should. Now, by the way, on Friday, the day after the 4th of July, when no one was paying attention, the CBO released its final analysis of the bill that actually passed the Senate, and they said that under this bill, if it works the way they say, they estimate, CBO, that 2/3 to 50% of the current rate of illegal immigration will continue. So it will not shut down illegal immigration. Now, another thing, there's so many things very...
No, Terry, I have to ask you to stop right there, and I want to go back to scratch down on a piece of paper what you're about to say because I want to hear it, but this is a Socratic show. Point, counterpoint, counterpoint, counterpoint. Bob, what about that? Because I have to admit, I've already expressed the fact that I'm kind of sympathetic to the Rubio plan, providing the triggers are hard and empirically verifiable and that we have actionable linchpin standards of binding compliance. I'm receptive to it, but at the same time, just as you celebrated how the CBO pointed out how there would be a windfall of $200 billion if we went along with this immigration package, so that same CBO said, as just mentioned by Terry Jeffrey, that we're going to see 2/3 of the problem in the form of illegal immigrants crossing still with us nonetheless. Isn't that a justification for a lot of resistance on the House side, Bob Weiner?
Well, it may be enough to get support for the bill. And by the way, Alan, you know that I agree with you. I'm resistant to immigration legislation. I don't think it's something that we desperately need, but the Republicans do desperately need it. And so I think that
they need a good bill. They don't need a bad bill. Nobody needs a bad bill. Telling me that we have an obligation to pass a suck-ass bill just because it has a particular name to it is silly. I mean, by that measure, everybody should have to vote for the bill entitled Mom and Apple Pie, even if there's some nefarious writers on there that hurt so many folks that are supposed to otherwise be helped. So I'm really tired of labels being used to justify facts that are purportedly explained by those words but are in fact disconnected from them. I don't like camouflaged agendas, Bob Weiner.
Well, I totally agree. That's why this bill should be called the Halliburton Boondoggle, because of the very monitoring and surveillance contracts that you mentioned are going to be happening. And people have pointed out that means Halliburton's going to be foursquare on our borders, the same way that they've been in the wars in the Middle East. But the fact that you get 20,000...
Wow, man, God, talk about detouring the discussion onto some self-indulgent road of escapism. You might as well tell me that you can't have a cup of coffee today because your brother-in-law rode a bicycle last week. There's no connection between what you just asserted and the topic about which we were earlier speaking. But anyway, you know what? I'm looking at the clock, and I don't have you guys for very long. Terry Jeffrey, you wrote down what you were about to say. Continue.
Well, look, there's a lot of crazy little items in the bill, like an illegal can have 2 DUIs and still be legalized. There's 2 big things in it I think are fundamentally un-American. One is if you're going to legalize illegals and then keep them as an underclass that has separate rights from permanent legal residents and citizens, that's not equal protection of the law. That's creating a subclass to exploit their labor. It's just flat un-American. I don't believe in it. It's wrong. We shouldn't do it, period. But
there's one point that... I'm sorry. There's one point that has to be made, Alan, and we've made it before. There's a negative immigration now, you know. We're getting less people in that are leaving because our job situation isn't good enough anymore.
But that's attributable to economics, not governance. That's attributable to economics and not governance, and therefore is an invalid fact to reference. It is not dispositive of anything that can control anybody. It's just the economy. So people, illegal immigrants on their own, are leaving, or those who would be illegal immigrants are having a change of heart and not coming because of economics. We can't let that supplant what should be better governance when later on, I hope anyway, we find that our economy rebounds and accordingly becomes the magnet that it has otherwise always been. When that resurfaces, we're going to need laws that support governance once economics is no longer able to do the job for us.
Right, but here's another un-American element of the bill as far as I'm concerned, besides treating
Terry
people
Jeffries, go ahead.
The other un-American element is our government knows right now, I think I mentioned before in the show, exactly who are the most egregious employers of illegal aliens in this country. They file massive numbers of no-match W-2s where the name doesn't have a matching Social Security number. One employer filed 37,375 of those in tax year 2005. For example, according to the Inspector General of Social Security, the Social Security and the IRS will not hand that information over to immigration enforcement because they say it violates the confidentiality rights of the people filing those tax returns. So what's happening is our government is deliberately not enforcing immigration law, so big businesses like the one that hired those 37,000 illegals and filed the false paperwork can exploit cheap foreign labor illegally. That is un-American in my view, and what I would like to see is the federal government enforce the law against those scofflaw employers who blatantly violate not only the immigration laws, but the tax filing laws. Those people deserve to have the law thrown at them. That would be the American thing to do.
Bob Weiner?
Oh, and I want to, Terry, I want to see you have any administration stop Walmart and Kmart from hiring those people so that the campaign contributions would absolutely stop. But, there is truth, too, to the fact that the economy improves with the immigrants here, which is why the Chamber of Commerce is so foursquare in support of the legislation.
Well, hold it, Bob.
Right.
Go ahead, Terry.
You have big business and big government and allegiance here conspiring against enforcing our law as passed by Congress. The president has a duty to enforce the law. Congress has a duty to make sure they do it, and they're both not doing it in the interest of these vested interests.
That's right.
That are exploiting cheap foreign labor at the expense of Americans.
And that was a bipartisan achievement.
Well, it is.
Of course it is.
It's disgusting.
Right.
It is disgusting.
I think we have an agreement on that one.